things don't happen on, I mean, this is not just a few faculty doing a little bit of work. This is mostly a few faculty doing a little bit of work and a lot of staff doing a lot of work. So I just want to acknowledge the staff of the department who've really done a lot of work, and this goes all the way back to March of last year. So I think they're sitting in the back. Guys, take a bow. I also want to single out Ryan Creedon, who's been the staff assistant for this event. Ryan? To acknowledge, we've had about 30, I think mostly student volunteers, but also some alum volunteers help throughout the workshop and the conference. So these are people, some of them are currently in the department, but we've also had alums from the department, and we've also had students from other schools who were participating in the workshop, helping out during the workshop and the conference as well. I don't know how many of them are here today. I see hands. We got one. We got a few. And the last thing I want to say is, as you've noticed, we've videotaped quite a bit. The morning lectures of the workshop were videotaped. The plenary talks have been videotaped, as will be this one. And then we've also taped the Future Directions panel. All of those things, if you go to the conference website and you go to the schedule, all of those things are linked to already. And then soon on the departmental webpage, you'll find the departmental YouTube channel with all those things available. So if you want to revisit any of the talks or so on, I guess this is on YouTube. You'll also be able to comment on any of it, which would be interesting. Okay, well, without further ado, I'll hand it over to Matt Lorick, who's going to introduce the last plenary speaker.
Morning, everybody. Happy summer solstice. These only get shorter from here, so go ahead. It is my pleasure to introduce Professor Tim Leung this morning. Tim is the director of our Computational Finance and Risk Management program. He is also vice chair of the SIAM Activity Group on Financial Mathematics and Engineering, and formerly the chair of the Inform's Financial Mathematics section. He's published over 50 papers, which is quite a high rate for our field. He's the founding editor of Modern Trends in Financial Engineering, an associate editor at SIAM Journal of Financial Mathematics, and also Applied Mathematical Finance. He obtained his PhD from Princeton University, and he was formerly a professor at both Johns Hopkins and Columbia. And perhaps his most notable accomplishment is he managed to co-author 2 papers with me. So I will let Tim take over.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Or do I need to stand here? Okay, thank you for the introduction. I do consider my high achievement is to reading through your notations when we go over our papers. So I want to thank Bernard and the organizers for the opportunity to speak here, to be part of this 50th anniversary conference. For those who don't know, I already actually gave 2 hours of workshops on stochastic control and optimal stopping on Monday. And I see people come back for it, so thank you for. So I won't torment you for another 2 hours or an hour with stochastic control, optimal stopping. So today, in view of being the last plenary talk, I'll keep it pretty light and accessible to everybody. So today, what I want to talk about is exchange traded funds. So that's what ETFs stand for. I just want to show you enough what it is about, and then point out a number of problems that we have worked on and that people can look at as well. So let me show if it works. Okay. So what are ETFs? So as the name suggests, ETFs are exchange traded. So they are traded on IC or NASDAQ, just like stocks. In fact, nowadays you can trade on your phone. If you have an app to trade or any online brokerage, you just trade them like stocks. But in contrast to mutual funds, they are not designed to maximize return. They are designed to track something. So, for example, an index like S&P 500 index, SPY, is the ticker for the largest ETF in the world. and they track S&P 500 index 1-to-1. There are also other things that they can track. For example, they designed to track this one. QQQ tracks the Nasdaq index. SXY tracks the Treasury bond index. GLD is the largest gold spot in gold ETF, meaning they track the gold spot price. They're also oil ETF, USO. They're also volatility ETF, VX6, and commodities, currencies, and so on and so forth. So just to give you an idea about how so broad the ETF universe is, and that's actually exactly why ETFs are very popular. If you think about, maybe 10 years ago or more, or 20 years ago, when you want to have an exposure in gold, and the only way you can do it is either using gold futures or buy a gold mining company. Nowadays, you have all these ETFs just traded like stock. You can gain exposure to various asset classes. And indeed, ETF universe has been really growing. Now it's over $1 trillion market with over 2,000 funds. And because they're so popular, there are even options written on them. And the options market is just half of the largest options market in the world in terms of daily notional. So there are, it's a very big market. The news, you go to CNBC, for example, there are new right now a segment on ETFs. So they also hedge fund that specialize in trading only ETFs. But the question is, what are ETFs really, right? Because they're not a company, they're not like a stock, like Apple or Google. So how do they even have a value, right? And in terms of value, I want to emphasize one thing that I forgot to mention. The largest ETF, just single ETF SPY, we call it a SPDR, have a market cap of $272 billion. Okay, just to give you a scale or magnitude here, that will put them at the 11th spot in terms of market cap in the entire U.S. market, right behind Walmart. So only 10 companies have more market cap than this one ETF, and yet we don't know what this ETF does, right? Has. So here I'm trying to give you an idea about the market mechanism of ETFs. So when we buy ETFs on an online brokerage, we are actually buying from an existing holder of an ETF. So this is a secondary market. So this is where most of us retail investors are. When we buy stock, we're buying from someone who already owns it. So there's a second-hand market, it's like buying a used car. But there are also a primary market for ETFs. So there is something called an ETF provider. So these are companies like State Street or BlackRock. They create these ETFs. So how do they create ETFs? Though they work with these so-called authorized participants, which are essentially market makers or traders in investment banks like Morgan Stanley or Goldman Sachs. So what they do is they create a creation redemption mechanism so that they mark the value for the ETF. So in fact, I can create an ETF right now with Matt here. So let's say I'm an ETF provider, right? And this is a piece of paper, and that's ETF is even more virtual than this. So let's say I want to create an ETF that tracks the value of pen. So these pens, they come in handy. So how is the ETF created? So if Matt gives me a piece of a pen, okay, and I give him a piece of paper, and I said, hey, hold on to this piece of paper. Whenever you want to redeem for your pen, bring me that piece of paper. That's it. That's what an ETF is. It's essentially a contract between the ETF provider and the holder that is a voucher for whatever they are supposed to track. Okay. So here I have an ETF for a pen. So you give me a pen, and I give him a share of this ETF. That is when one share of ETF is created. So the process can be reversed. When he comes to me, bring me a piece of this paper, and I give him a pen. That's when he is redeeming the ETF by collecting the asset that the ETF is supposed to track. So now, if you trust this process, trust me in giving you the pen when you need it, when you redeem the ETF, then the value of this piece of paper should be the same as the value of the pen, right? And if I'm selling you this piece of paper, or the value of this paper on the market right now is higher than the value of the pen, then you will try to sell this piece of paper and or buy a lot of pens and sell this, and redeem through me, sell this piece of paper. So that is where so-called a arbitrage mechanism where that keep the price of the ETF and the price of the pen close to each other, because when they are deviating from each other, there should be buy and sell actions to bring them back together. So this is how ETFs are created. This is the so-called primary market. We don't get to see as retail investors, but these are what ETFs are. Okay. So how do they actually keep track of the ETF provider? How do they keep the value of the ETF the same, right? Or how do they guarantee that they can deliver the asset when the ETFs are redeemed. The example I just showed you, where I actually hold a bunch of pens, that is so-called full physical replication, meaning that I have all the assets in-house ready for redemption. But let's say my ETF is really popular. I have 1,000 shares of ETF, but I only have $100 pens. So that's when I go beyond my full replication, meaning I don't have one-to-one connection between the ETF and the inventory anymore. So what I have is actually a partial replication. So I'm hoping that there's no run on an ETF that I don't have enough pens to give, right? Or maybe I can only keep half of a pen or something. So in the S&P 500 case, many some ETF provider would, instead of holding all 500 stocks, they only hold the top 50, for example, because they're easiest to trade, and the rest they just get them when they need it. So the third one is so-called derivative based, because in the ETF market, as I show you, there are is doing. Okay, so this is the so-called volatility index. So imagine the financial market, S&P, there is an index that sort of measures how volatile the market is. So you might have heard the name, like fear gauge or fear index. That is what it is. That's the volatility index. It is inferred from the S&P options implied volatility. So basically, the higher the value of this means that the market is expected to be more volatile, and a lower, means usually coincide with peace, calm period in the market. Okay. So this is an index that many investors want to have exposure to. I definitely look at every day. You probably find a news article every day about this index called the IX. Matt has tons of papers on this subject as well. So here's just to give you a motivation why investors, and in terms of by investor I mean some of the largest funds that you can imagine, like Bridgewater's, AQR's, and so on, talking about hundreds of $billions trying to get exposure into this index called the WIX index. And this is to give you a motivation of why they want to do that. if you just invest in the S&P market, right, just hold S&P, which is basically one-to-one shares of the S&P market. So it's not $100 value, right, in the year of September 2011, okay, just a part of the year. What happens was, if you remember, that summer, S&P downgraded U.S. Treasury, so that led to market to crash for the summer days about August there. Had you had 10% of the portfolio, just 10% of the portfolio value invested in VIX, then you would have survived that in flying colors, okay? And even in good years, right, let's pick a good year where the S&P go up over 10-15% here, right? If you have 10% in VIX in your same thing, in the same, essentially same portfolio, 9% in the S&P and 10% in VIX, you essentially achieve the same return, but you can look at that, it's much less volatile portfolio value over time. So you see, sometimes even when the market crashes a little bit, you actually go up, right? Because VIX tends to go in the opposite direction as the market. Okay, so this is just a motivation to show you why people, investors want to have exposure to VIX. Okay, but VIX itself is an index; it's intangible. Like you can buy it, get a piece of it, or try to replicate in a portfolio to directly trade it. So it's not tradable. So why? How do you do it? So either you trade futures yourself, or VIX options. Even then, it's not really direct trade. You're not directly trading the index. So many investors, because of the ease of it, they trade in volatility ETFs. So VX6 is the one. It is a volatility ETF that there's no trading. That's supposed to track VIX. Okay. So what's interesting though is that we talk about futures as it's very foreign to us because no one here probably have traded futures, right? But when you trade ETF, many of them are actually portfolio of futures. So indirectly, you're trading futures. In fact, it might be in your retirement account that that you have some ETF. Probably most of you have some ETF in your retirement account, and then some of them are including futures. And then the question is, how does the price evolve? So here I want to show you a very simple Mickey Mouse example how things would go wrong with volatility ETF. Okay. So let me show you a simple model. This is a simple SDE to represent the dynamics of the VIX index. So one salient feature of the VIX index is that it's mean reverting, right? So you want to capture some sort of that kind of behavior, and it's positive. So this is the SDE, the process that allows you to capture that kind of movement. Because when X is lower than some fixed level, there's a positive drift to move the process up, and vice versa. And for this term, is give you a little bit of fluctuation noise to the process. The square root of X is, you can see, as the process goes to zero, this noise goes to zero. So that's kind of keep the process positive. What we want to do is to say, suppose the VIX follows such a process. What is the futures price? Futures price is the simplest contract that to price. It's simply a conditional expectation of the future price or future value of that index. So here in this model, you can complete explicitly. Okay, so the price function is not important in of itself. Just to show you that it's a simple model, but it can fit the fixed futures prices using the market data in both good and bad situation. So bad is this is bad because this is 2008, I think, 2008 November 20th. So the implied volatility is 80. So VIX index spot price that is over 80, that's really bad. But on a good day, it will be around 12. Okay, so but the model can fit both. Okay. What I want to show you is that what is the volatility ETFs? Okay, if you look at the prospectus, volatility ETFs tells you that it holds two futures, one futures and two futures. Okay, so front month imagine this is 1 month maturity, this is 2 months maturity. Okay, and then they hold these two futures only. The rest they put in the bank. And it's a known portfolio. If you look at the prospectus, this is exactly the formula they use in the prospectus. Meaning, if you look at the picture, they start with 100% in the shorter month futures, but the shorter month futures will expire at some point, right? So they have to reduce the holding of the shorter month futures and slowly increase the holding of the second month future. Okay, so at any point in time they hold two futures, and then they slowly decrease the first one to zero towards the expiration for the first one, and then load up the second one, and so on and so forth. So you say mathematically, it's just a time deterministic, linear portfolio. Okay, and this is the corresponding equation to represent the portfolio value. Think of it as the infinitesimal change, relative change of the portfolio value, right? Where does it come from? Where does the change come from? Come from the first future and the second futures. Okay. What I'm trying to show you is that let's because we have the futures prices, we can plug in the value, the formula, and show that what I want is not how the value change with respect to futures. I want the fixed, the portfolio value change with respect to the fixed index. In this case, X is the fixed index, because I want one-to-one exposure. So what I want is that this coefficient is very important to me, because essentially if it's one-to-one tracking, what it means is that my portfolio value relative change should be 1 times the relative change of the index. So you want the part in green here to be 1. Okay? And simple substitution shows that this coefficient is just this thing. Okay? Now the question is, can you choose W1, WT, which is the units of your futures, so that this is 1. And if you look at this, the answer for any deterministic portfolio is not. So what I'm trying to say is that even though the portfolio itself has a time deterministic strategy, it results in a stochastic exposure to the fixed index that you don't really control. Okay, or no matter what whatever choice is. Okay. So one way to see that is, and it's conforming to the market observation, is that we calibrate to the market data, right? The parameters, and just similar and similarly, actually this is a real fixed value. It's around 12 and 13. So this blue line here is the fixed, which is the index value. The things that are kind of decreasing here are all the futures prices and the portfolio values. Okay. So this is what we see in the market, which is VX6 and the portfolio and the futures prices tend to decrease in value over time. And in fact, if you hold on to futures every month, this is the sort of a cash flow you have at the end of every month. So let's say you have something that expired in a month, and in a month you realize P&L, here, like 90% of the time, you realize a negative P&L. Okay? That means whatever you buy in this case futures, the futures you're buying in, okay, when they expire, will have less value than when you enter the market. So meaning the futures, fixed futures tends to lose money. Okay? And it tends to lose money very often. Okay? So why does it matter to us? We're not a futures trader. Well, if you are trading, holding VX6, the volatility ETF. Volatility ETF is a known portfolio. They can change the portfolio even futures prices are going down. So they're condemned to hold on. So over time, they are just realizing these negative losses. Okay, these losses. In fact, if you trade it for the last 3 years, from February 16 to 19, this is how much money you have lost. Just a simple buy and hold position, lose over 90% of the value. Okay, so that's what the portfolio dynamics give us, suggest to us. In fact, the news is picking up to that. If you look at Bloomberg News a few months ago, the ETF actually had lost over 99% of its value, and they eventually it died, but it's kind of resurrected in a new ticker. So so now it's VA6B, and okay, but let us to ask us another mathematical question. Can we construct a portfolio, right, with total freedom, where we're not limited to time deterministic portfolio, or even limited to futures? Let's say I can trade any number of futures I want, any kind of strategies. Can I track the fixed index 1-to-1? That's it, right? So we know the shortcoming of the volatility ETF, right? But that's their portfolio. Can I construct a portfolio that can create the perfect exposure, perfect tracking? So here I consider n futures, and just this portfolio value again, right? So I can have any type. So the W here, the portfolio weight can be stochastic. It can depend on anything. Okay. So let's say sticking with the CRO model for a moment, if I plug into the futures prices, then I can express everything in terms of X, which is the fixed index, and then I just rearrange to show my coefficient in front of the change of the fixed index. Now the question is, can I choose here my portfolio weight, right, this whole thing here, so that this coefficient is 1. Okay? So let's say I set it to be 1, right? And then I back out what the portfolio weights are. Okay? Or any number. So here, in front of the coefficient here, right, I set it to be beta. Beta can be your favorite number, 1 or something, right? The burden is to find out what the corresponding portfolio is, right? But I want to show you that if you choose beta with 1, if you look at this SCD, that's also, this same term also appears here. That means when you fix the exposure, you're fixing the drift as well. And here's what happens. If you fix it to be constant, you fix the drift in red here. That means that if you want that beta to be 1, right? Beta to 1, the perfect exposure, you actually don't have perfect exposure because you're left with this stochastic drift. Okay, and you can actually write down explicitly your portfolio dynamics in terms of the risk here of the index and so on. Okay. So what I'm saying is, you can set beta to whatever number you like, but you actually don't have the perfect exposure you want, but we're left with this stochastic drift. Okay? So that's one thing. Now what if I fix the drift, right? So you fix the drift to some number, right? Then you fix the drift to be some number A, for example, then your drift, the coefficient in front of the dx over x, which is the fixed exposure, is then stochastic. So this is a simple exercise to show you that you can really perfectly track the VIX index using any number of futures you want, or any strategy. There's just it's just impossible to perfectly track the VIX index. So when you see ETF, they say, okay, we can perfectly track the VIX index, it is impossible. Okay, so this is a simple example, but this is also an example with the fewer source of randomness. So we actually give them the easiest, way to make it work. So it doesn't work in one dimensional primary motion model, it won't work in n dimensional. So that motivates us to address a bigger problem, which is how do I trade different instruments like futures and options to track an index in a multi-dimensional, multi-factor model for just not specific to the CR model, not specific to the VIX index, just any index you want, any factor you like in an n-dimensional d-factor model. Okay. So here, imagine S is an index, so we will consider a system of SDEs here. S is the index. Imagine that it's like S&P or VIX index, right? And it's driven by a number of sources, source of randomness, described by these prime motions. So 0 to D here. So they are D plus 1 prime motions. Okay, and Y's are the factors. So the Y's, they show up in the coefficients of all the SDEs. Okay. So we don't have to look too closely to this. This is a general framework to model. Basically, I want D plus 1 source of randomness and D plus 1 numbers of D factors. So D, the number of Y's here, and plus the index itself. Okay. So under this Markovian model, you can price any derivative using conditional expectation. So the price of any option, for example, with payoff structure given by this function h. Okay. And K is just the index of the K number of contracts. So this is a payoff. It can be a payoff of the index itself. It can be a payoff of all the factors as well. So a general expectation to show you that the price of a contract could be a call option, put options, futures, can be given by this expectation. Okay, we don't need to know exactly what this looks like because I want to work with the general framework. I'm not advocating any specific model. I just want to answer a question. Let's say I can trade all these. Can I track the index itself? Okay? So you kind of reverse hedging problem, right? In the hedging problem where we want to trade the stocks to hedge a derivative. Now I trade a derivative to see whether I can track the underlying asset itself. And the reason I want to do that is because the underlying asset often is actually not tradable, including S&P 500 index or VIX index. So if I write down the SDE of the futures contract, options contract, or any derivative here, I write it in a way that it's expressed in terms of DT terms, so how it changes with time, how it changes with respect to the reference asset and the other factors. Okay, so the color are the coefficients. Okay, we didn't really look into this, but one thing is that by the definition, they actually satisfy some equation together. Okay, but this is how the options contract value evolve. All right. So I can now construct a portfolio involving these derivatives. Okay. And this is my portfolio weight, and so on. Here, actually, this is portfolio value. So this is not the index, it's my portfolio value, right? So the question is, how can I choose these portfolio strategies such that I can perfectly track the spot? So now, the same thing, I can write the portfolio equation in terms of DT term, the change of the spot, the reference index here, and the factors, okay, in these kind of terms. Now, what does perfect tracking mean? So perfect tracking means that if I specify alpha, the coefficient here, beta, the coefficient in front of ds over s, and other green coefficients, right? You tell me that you want this to be 1 or 0 or any number, then I can give the strategy to you. By that, I mean, then you have to solve for the corresponding portfolio strategies. And in that, effectively, you have to solve this system of equations. Okay? So one thing about this system equation is that one of the equations is redundant because by definition, C, D, and E is actually satisfy this equation. And this equation is kind of special in that if you look at the coefficients, okay, as a row vector, you multiply here, that means this equation, every one of them will satisfy to give you 0. And this has to give you 0 too. So that means that if you multiply the coefficients to the column here, you will arrive at this equation. This actually turns out to be the equation that any model you suggest to me has to satisfy in order to have the desired tracking exposure. So meaning that if you say, I want this exposure to be 1 or 2, right? Any number you like specify here, then I can say, well, does it satisfy this equation? If not, I can tell you a priori, without solving for a strategy, that you cannot do that. Okay? If all of them satisfy this, you cannot perfectly track the index or S or whatever it is with the desired exposure. Okay? So this is what we call tracking condition. So the point of this is that it allows me to say, look at any specific model and then plug it in here and say whether you can do it or not. Or if you say, okay, well, I don't really care about perfect tracking, I want really the exposure control, then you specify beta, you specify your eta, then I can tell you what kind of stochastic drift you're exposed to. Okay, and all the time this stochastic drift is negative. Then that means I can tell you the expected sort of value erosion you will have if you want to gain certain exposure. There really is no free lunch, meaning that all the time if you want to have exposure to some index or factors, you actually bleed your portfolio at some certain bleeding, and it's fully quantified by this equation, the drift here. You know, we work on the stochastic calculus a little bit more. It turns out that we can actually even write the whole portfolio explicitly in terms of the index and the factors and your exposure equation. So you know, you work on the SDE and you solve it. This is explicit because you're writing the portfolio value explicitly in terms of the spot to some power, and the factors policy, which are all explicit here. What's interesting is that there's some exponential factor here. This is actually we call it slippage process, because what this means is that, let's say you want double exposure, meaning beta to be 2. Oftentimes this term is negative, right? You think about 2, right? 2 times 1 minus 2 is negative. Or you put any negative number, it's also negative. In fact, for any number beta that is not between 0 and 1, this is negative. And then you multiply by something positive, this is essentially the realized variance of volatility of the spot. And then they also bunch out terms. You can forget about those for a moment. What I'm trying to say is, oftentimes, you can plug in any specific model. This is negative, and that's what we call why we call it slippage process, because your portfolio value with certain desired exposure will be subject to some sort of decay over time, and this then you can fully specify in terms of the volatility, in terms of the leverage of exposure number. Okay. The other terms are based on the exposure of other factors you want. So it's not essentially the same, but because there are also correlation between this index and the factors, you can see there are the sigma ij term, which is account for the covariance between the index between the factors. Okay, and here are the covariance between these factors and the index. Okay, so it's all complicated term. It's explicit. You can, once you specify a model, you can write down what this is and quantify the slippage you would expect to have for your portfolio. Okay, so in a simple case, you can see that the portfolio return, this is an essential log return of your portfolio with certain exposure. Let's say, for simplicity, let's take beta be some constant beta here, and eta all constant, right? In reality, you can make it stochastic or time deterministic. So it will be given by this equation a little bit cleaner than the previous one. What I'm trying to show you is that this slippage process inside is the so-called realized variance. If you look at this realized variance, right, the rule of thumb is that the larger of this, the worse it is because it's multiplied by some negative coefficient. Okay, so the longer you hold, right, this is integral or something positive. So the longer you hold, the more negative that term will be. And the more volatile the reference is, like S&P being more volatile, the worse this is as well. Okay? So we see this under this general framework for meaning that any model you like, you plug it in, you will see something like this. It's just that the evolution of this may be different. Okay? But the structure will be the same. So here is one of the favorite models, popular models for modeling equities. So this is a so-called Heston model. where you have the volatility of that the stock or index here is stochastic, so satisfying a essential CR process, right? With coordinate right motions. Okay. So under this model, right? So if someone wanted to use this model to price things or model the S&P index, I can tell them this is tracking condition, meaning that if you want beta exposure, right, and eta exposure to the factor to y, this is the drift that you're supposed to see. So even if you turn one of those off, meaning eta is 0, you're still subject to some drift in addition to the exposure you want. So if you want to actually find those strategies, you can go back to the system equation I showed you and actually solve the equation. Okay. And in this case, it's some simple one factor, right? One additional factor. So you have a 2x2 system here. You can solve for two portfolio ways. What I'm going to show you is that if whether you can track it or gain the desired exposure depends on the instruments you can actually trade. But in this case, if you only can trade futures on S, okay, then you can work out a system. Look back to this system equation, just 2x2. You can find out that the determinant actually is 0, meaning that you can actual the values of those, and you can realize that you can solve this system, which means that if you only have futures on S, you cannot track gain the desired exposure. The system tells you that you can do it. Okay. So how can you do it? Well, one way to do that is if you can trade the futures on S, and there's also futures on Y. So that would be, we require to interpret the model a little differently, meaning Y would be the fixed index, for example, and you model the dynamics of that. If you can trade futures on S and futures on Y, then you go back to the system, and in that case, the system is solvable. You can actually find out the corresponding strategy for the futures on S and the futures on Y in W1 and W2. So this is an example to show you if you specify a specific model, you can specify the strategies. But you can also find out, depending on what you trade, whether you can actually track or gain a desired exposure with respect to the S or Y here. Okay. Okay. So under this specific model, it's a little bit simpler in explicit, so I can show you what the slippage process is. So under this specific model, you have the slippage process that looks like this. And it's in different colors just to show you the effect of different things. For example, the first one is the stuff in red are functions of beta, as you can see, very simple function of beta. And we put them together, that under this model is always negative, regardless of the beta of y. For beta positive, right? So if you want to gain long exposure to the index like S&P, you would have to have some value erosion in portfolio due to this part of the slippage process. You have other process, that sort of create some fluctuation. So exposure to the factors, in this case, the volatility factor or the fixed index will give you this term, which reverses around 0. But also there's another term here that's a little more complicated, depends on the correlation and so on, that can give you some of the value. But we find in our observation, this term will be the dominating factor that leads to decreasing in value of the portfolio if you want to gain leverage exposure to index. Okay. So this is sort of the first part of my talk to show you that there are many ETFs that claim to track certain things. First you want to know mathematically is it even possible in a single factor model or n factor model, and depending on what you trade, right? So maybe futures or any derivative, is it possible, and what's the consequence of gaining those exposure? Okay, so maybe you have the exposures, but you actually suffer portfolio value decay over time because of that. Okay. So that also show you that their leverage, their exposures, there are also different types of exposures. So for example, in going back to this slippage process, beta, when beta is greater than 1, we can call it the leverage exposure. So, and it's also another thing that's sort of popular in the market, where investors want to gain leverage exposure to certain things like S&P or even volatility. So that's when beta is greater than 1. In fact, it's so popular that nowadays there are exchange traded funds that give you that desired leverage exposure. What it means is, let's say S&P goes up by 1%. There is an ETF called SSO that gives you 2% on that day. There's also another ETF, if S&P goes up by 1%, it goes down by 2%. It's called SDS. So and so on and so forth. They are multiple of 3, they are multiple of -3. So these are all traded, and they are pretty high volume traded every day as well. So, and this is not the only one. So S&P, there's S&P, the ones track NASDAQ, Dow Jones, and gold, silver, almost anything, major indices or assets, they have a leverage ETF. Okay? So basically, what they do is they replicate, they will promise a multiple of the daily returns of the index, of the underlying that they refer to. Okay? So this, let's say this S&P return, and then you multiply by a constant beta every day, and then the value, portfolio value of the leverage share should grow like this. Okay, that's what you can see from the prospectus actually. Now the question is, why would we ever want to have leverage exposure, right? Why do we even want to buy a leverage ETF? Well, it's mostly for speculators. Let's say you're betting the S&P going to go up, 5 days in a row or 3 days in a row. Okay, then you will be better off in terms of return to have a higher leverage ETF, meaning. Right, because if instead of going by, let's say 1% in the next 3 days, now it's like 2% next 3 days, right? So that's why. In fact, you can do it, right? You can differentiate this log return of the leverage ETF in terms of beta. If all the returns of S&P is positive, this thing is positive, meaning the higher the beta, the better. Okay, there's one way to see that. So that's actually, sounds good, right? And I can see why people want to do it. In fact, there are people who want to invest in it without really understanding the risk. So this is actually motivation for my research. About 10 years ago, when SEC threw this alert about leverage ETF, inverse just means the beta and negative ETFs. There are additional risks involved, and that people may not understand. So this is what happens. What's the risk? What are the extra risks that they're referring to? Okay, I want to show you that by showing first some figures. So these are the most common leverage ETF in the market that tracks S&P with respect to S&P. So SPY, we're seeing that. SSO is +2, SD is -2, and +3, -3. What I want to show you is the daily returns. If I just buy and hold these leverage ETFs, what you expect is how much, that it should be close to the declared multiple, right, or advertised multiple of the S&P return. So if I plot the returns, right, let's say SSO here, we should, compare the 2 times of S&P return. You expect the return should be on the red line, straight line, and slope line here, if they're accurate. Okay, this is holding for 1 day, so it looks pretty good. If we hold it for 2 weeks and then 2 months, you can see the sharp deviation, very clear deviation from below, right, from the red line, meaning that your the return of the leverage ETF is under less than 2 times the S&P. Okay, so this is not as visible. If you go to SDS, which is -2. It's more visible that you get less return than -2 of the S&P. 3 times, you don't even have the whole 2 months to see it. You hold about 2 weeks, you see these dots, blue dots here, meaning that the we call triple long leverage ETF Pro is less than 3 times the S&P return. The same thing for the short inverse leverage ETF. So what's going on here? I mean, what we're seeing here is that the longer you hold, it seems that the more value erosion or deviation from the expected return, from holding. So the question is why? Here's one example. I can do it without much any math to show you why these things will go wrong. So think about this. If S&P or anything you like goes up, let's say go down by 2%, right? It says start 100. Goes down by 2%, go up by 1, go back by 2%. So what happened? Well, first you don't get back to 100, right? Because 0.98 times 1.02 is 99.96. So you lose a little bit, right? Now imagine it's multiplied by 2 every day. So it means you go down to 96 and go back to 99.84. So that is worse than this one, even though you feel like the market is not directional. And so you realize that so-called so we call it volatility decay because it's essentially coming from the volatility of the reference, but then you're decaying more than the non-average version. Okay, so it is only compound over time, right? If you do this, you realize that as short as 2 days. Okay, so if you hold it for long term, you kind of handicapped by this decay because of the magnified up and down returns. Okay. the whole idea is just 1 minus x times 1 plus 8 is 1 minus x squared. And then and you repeat that and multiply the x, then it's worse. Okay? So that's the intuition why. And we can see in a continuous framework, what does that mean? Okay? So with that intuition, I want to consider a simple SDE for the reference. Okay, so imagine this is your S&P index, and it satisfies some standard SDE, meaning you have some drift term. This can be anything, your favorite stochastic drift here, and the subprime motion term. Okay, so this is the volatility here. So I don't have to specify anything. I just want to show you that within this general framework, what happens. So what is leverage ETF? A leverage ETF, by definition, is to invest. Let's say you have $100 value in your portfolio right now. Then you invest, say, twice of that. Okay, a multiple of that value into the risky asset. So you have $100, you need to invest $200 worth of asset. How do you do it? Well, you borrow the rest. You borrow $100. So that means you have to borrow beta minus 1 of your portfolio value to invest in the risky asset. That is the whole mechanism of a leverage portfolio. So you can apply that sort of financial idea into this SDE and write down the corresponding leverage ETF portfolio value, which is this portfolio value on the left here is beta times the S&P return here with this group. So it looks very simple, right? It looks very benign. Why is it a problem? Well, we can actually solve this SDE as well. We can be writing the leverage ETF value explicitly in terms of these S and everything else. So it turns out that if you write log tail log on both sides, right, it may be easier to see this way, this linearize this. The log return of the leverage ETF is beta times the log return of the S&P, right, the reference index you like. But there is a term here, is beta minus beta squared over 2 times B. What's B? B is the integral of the sigma squared. This is the volatility of the S&P return. So this is what we call the realized variance of the reference index. So what that means is that it turns out that your leverage ETF return is not just beta times the log return of the desired index or S&P here. You actually have this additional term, and this additional term, this coefficient in red, is negative for all beta greater than 1 or negative. So all the numbers I gave you, 2, 3, negative 2, negative 3, they all lead to this term, this coefficient to be negative. And it's multiplied to this realized variance, and it's proportional to the time, right, or how long you hold it for, and the volatility realized by S&P. So there's 3 more things working against you. One is high leverage is bad, it's quadratic, right? So if you have a highly leveraged ETF, this term becomes more negative, holding everything else constant. The longer you hold, it's more negative. More volatile S&P is, more negative. This is what we call volatility decay for leverage ETF. Okay? So based on this observation, you can do a lot of work on this, meaning what's the long-run behavior of this. We have a paper together with Matt here on options written on this, accounting for this additional source of resonance now of path dependence. So just to give you an idea, this is the math, but I keep claiming that you will lose money, but this is one way to see it. This is the gold ETF. I just got it this morning from Yahoo Finance. So GLD is the largest gold ETF in the world. You buy it, supposed to track the gold spot price. Okay. All right. Nothing against that because they do keep a lot of gold in their inventory. So they seem to track the gold spot price pretty good. Now, but then there are other ETF providers. They provide something called UGLD, which is a 3x times the gold spot. So if gold goes up by 1% today, they give 3% to you. Okay? And there's another one that goes to do the opposite. Okay? So if you look at, let's say you hold it since 2015 July, right? Okay? So one question I have all the time when I give talks is that, okay, well, we know they lose money, right, for long leverage ETF, money beta. Why don't I just hold both, right? Because they go in opposite direction, right? Okay, here's to show you that if you long both, you can still be in trouble. Okay, so the red one is the negative one, negative 3. The purple one is the positive 3. Let's say you hold it in July in 2015, right? So they do tend to go in linear fashion, right? When one goes up, the other goes down because they take opposite direction with respect to the spot, which is in green here. But you can see 0 somewhere is here, right? 0 is here. In the end, both lose money. Both lose money. In fact, they both lose close to 30-40%. That's because of the volatility decay that I just showed you in this equation. Okay, so given time, this thing will show up. and really makes you lose money, even if you hold both. Even if you hold both, you're losing 40%, right? Okay. So that's that. So now another question is when I give a talk that I tend to get is especially in traditional stock, is that okay? Well, I know something that decreases value, right? And these are traders, so they don't care if things lose value. What do they do when things lose value? They short it, right? So they say, okay, why don't I short them, right? So that's the intuition. But I can raise them with something more. So instead of shorting, so the idea and is you can find the investor notes in investment banks like Citibank and Morgan Stanley, where they suggest a strategy where they just short each of these. Okay, that's the investment product. Yeah. But we can do more because the intuition is that the two things are losing value. One, just short them so that they tend to go in opposite directions. So it's kind of market neutral. But we can do a bit more. We can say, well, there are actually more than two leverage ETFs in the market, right? So what if you construct a portfolio? This is a simple thing of let's say 3 leverage ETF and put them together. These are portfolio weights, and then you can plug in the value of the equation I just showed before, right? In terms of the return of S and the realized variance, and then put them in terms of the log return of the index and the realized variance. And then in front of that's a coefficient, right? Well, you have 3 instruments, 2 degrees of freedom. You can choose so that these 2 coefficients of any number you like by solving a linear, just 2 by 2 matrix, really. Right, 2 by 2 system equations here with constants here and constants here. So you can solve it very easily, right? And actually, the answer to that is the portfolio. So because we have many different ETFs, like +3, +2, -1, -2, -3, there are a number of combinations. So instead of doing just shorting 2, right? You can actually long short or short or long to create a portfolio with the desired exposure. In this one, when I say delta equals 0, that means you have the 0 exposure to spot movement, meaning that if the S&P moves, if you set a coefficient to be 0, you have no exposure to that. And then you can fix here, we say another number, like 1, for example. So this is called delta neutral portfolio, meaning that it's immune to local movement of the reference index, but long volatility. Meaning the more volatile the market is, you're supposed to make money, and alpha is sort of the positive return you get from this portfolio. So this is just a simple exercise to show you that once you realize the mathematical structure of leverage ETF, the volatility decay, you can construct portfolios as simple as solving in the system. So if you were on Monday's workshop, we talk about surprise control. We can basically set this thing in motion and in continuous time how to adjust portfolio. So this is a thing that we know is implemented in industry. Great. So that's kind of all I have to do in terms of telling you what giving you the instructions to ETF and leverage ETFs. So we're talking about tracking performance. For tracking, we have to understand how we can do it, whether we can do it, and how what kind of things we can trade to get it. And we talk about certification process and so on. And for volatility, for leverage ETF, we talk about volatility decay and how do you trade it. But this is just to in a limited amount of time to give you a taste of what ETFs are and some of the issues. But there are a number of problems that we pursue and continue to pursue on these fronts. So because a lot of the ETFs are involving futures, they're actually motivated to look at dynamic and actually also static and dynamic portfolio futures to replicate either some spot that no one can trade or leverage exposure of that. So instead of doing just like half-wise tracking that we have discussed, we can form a portfolio in measure respect to say quadratic criterion and so on. We never talk about risk here, but risk is important. It's also important for our program. So we can talk about sort of risk measures for leverage ETFs, like what are the critical or visible leverage if you want your risk measure to stay within the critical level, or how long you should hold it for. So that can answer to the SEC alert question. There are options now, like I said, on ETF and leverage ETFs, that they have, like to see how you account for the path dependence. ETF actually, if you look at profitability industry, one thing that ETFs are unintended consequence is that before ETF, they're not easily traded instruments that track something. So now we have S&P that tracks S&P 500 index, SPY. ETF that tracks S&P 500 index. In fact, there's only one issue, that's SPDR and State Street. But there are also other ETF, Vanguard is example, Leung is another ETF that tracks S&P. So now we have multiple ETF that track the same thing. So what do you expect? Well, you expect them to move in parallel. So it also means that any deviation, you better get to converge. And so one sort of unintended consequence of ETF and the popularity of it is that it creates a lot of pair trading in the market. You can, online or talk to practitioners or even top trading firms that I know, they almost fully invested in trading the deviation among ETFs. So there are a lot of so-called mean reversion trading, basically betting on the deviation to revert to zero. So we talk about dynamic futures portfolio, meaning that instead of tracking something, what about if you want to have exposure, invest in certain asset class, well, we can actually have dynamic strategies. So we talk about that on Monday, the second part of the talk. So, but these are a lot of the problems. And so ETF is actually, give me the motivation to work on, a series of problems there summarized here, and the corresponding trading strategies are talked about in this book right here. Just link you here with my website. If you want my slides or even a PDF in my books, you can just email me. Okay, I'll stop here.
Are there questions for Tim? Yes.
Tim, nice talk. Earlier you showed a slide where hypothetically you could protect a SPDR ETF by using 10% of
Right.
VIXX. Suppose you do have a one-to-one ETF you can trade for VIXX. At first sight, it looked like it's very effective protection, but it also depends on the normalization of the two indexes. It's 10% versus 90%. From the investor standpoint, is how much would it cost me to purchase this protection by purchasing this ETF that tracks VIXX? Would it cost me 10% of the SPDR value? And if that's the case, then it's not a feasible protection. So how could we quantify that cost?
Yes, I see. And go back to that slide. So the question is, you can construct a portfolio with S&P and let's say VIX here, assuming it's tradable, right? So let's answer that question with that assumption. But then, right, this thing could lead to loss of value, I'm saying, right? So sometimes, right? Of course, it depends on the correlation. So or anti-gold movement actually. That's the one reason. We don't pick VIX randomly. We pick it because it tends to move in opposite direction and SPY. And then the other question is sizing, right? If you're betting on, if you reverse it at percentage, right, 10% here and 9%, then you're essentially betting on this, you're investing in this instead of S&P, right? So that's why we show in here is 90 and 10, meaning the normalization. We mentioned part of that question is about what this 9% means. 9% here means 9% of your portfolio value. Let's say your portfolio is worth $100 today. You assign $90 of it in S&P and $10 in VIX. Now tomorrow your portfolio value may be 120. You still want to maintain that. That means you have a balance, right? Because otherwise, one thing we become keep going up, and the percentage will keep going up for the losing asset, right? So that's it is. So in terms of cost, that rebalance will have some cost in itself, right? Because in order to maintain that kind of portfolio, you actually have to sell the more expensive asset. Okay, so there's this sell high, there's transaction there, and the dynamic of this is not guaranteed. None of this is guaranteed. So you can quantify this by, well, in this case, VIX, we can model the value of this, and then you have to model also sort of the correlation or co-movement of these two in order to fully quantify what's the value of this. Because if these two are co-moving, right, then that's meaning they go the same direction. That's different portfolio than something that goes in opposite. If they perfectly go in the opposite direction, then you kind of have a constant portfolio there. So that's something you can calibrate, simulate, and compute different risk measures. So
suppose I'm buying some sort of options to protect my slider.
Yeah.
It costs me something to buy that.
Yeah.
And then when time comes, it expires, I lose that value. So with this strategy, if some of the fixed index probably use options, some of them will expire. There's a cost to buy them. How
Yeah.
is that
Right.
built in for that protection?
I see. So now let's go back to reality then. So VXX itself is not direct tradable. So most people, if you trade VXX itself is selling futures. So the expiration that you mentioned actually also happens for futures. And futures market, I will show you, typically you see something like this. What that means is that when you buy futures, it's here, 1 month to maturity, right? This is the current value. And suppose this curve doesn't change, that means your futures price is going to go down to the spot value. So when you buy it, you buy something at $14 and you go down to 12.
Right.
And that is a value erosion because of the contracts. Same thing in options, right? They have this time decay. So what I'm trying to show you is that in part of this exercise, show you that you cannot avoid it. That is a part of the reason that VXX does not work, because essentially you keep paying the insurance.
Yeah.
All right, you buy a contract, let them expire, right? You don't change the strategies, and that's why they lose value like this. Okay, this is an accumulation of the monthly, we call time decay that it accumulate over time, and because it's an exchange traded product, you cannot change strategies. So you keep long, they're condemned to hold long in the future. They tend to lose value over time. That's why you have this. If you replace your options, it's the same, possibly worse. There are actually some called options-based ETF. But they are not popular because people know you can lose a lot better.
So no cheap way for
No cheap way.
Yeah.
But in fact, since you bring that question, there are actually another dimension of that question because of ETF. Now, let's say you want S&P exposure, you can buy options, right? But because of leverage ETF, you can buy also options on leverage ETFs. Now, the question is, question to mess up with everyone's mind here, right? If let's say I'm long S&P, I can buy a call on S&P, right? Call options like, you can buy the stock share price, you're long, you buy a call, right? Okay. Well, there's an inverse leverage ETFs that goes down when S&P goes up. So you would buy a call on that. You buy a put, right? You can buy a put there, right? So meaning you want that leverage ETF to go down in value, you buy a put on that. So that's another way to have a long position, right, or bullish position on S&P. Now that they are all available, the question is which one should you buy, right? So they all cost money, but to answer your question, we can find the cheapest one. And that's one more paper, the main we have, is to connect these markets and find a common way to measure the price of this. It's like, there's a house in Bellevue, a house in Seattle. How do I know which one's more expensive? Well, you can have a measure, unit measure, right? Like price per square foot, right? How do they do that in options market across these options? We actually share same source methods. Yeah.
So I believe we have a break now. So do you have more questions for Tim? Let's pass it